All right, you're live. We're going to start with some housekeeping items. Make sure that you're in a quiet space with no to minimal background noise. Please be sure to mute yourself when you're not speaking. Each time you speak, announce your name to identify yourself to listeners and say thank you to denote that you are done speaking. When making or seconding a motion, please state your name. We will be using a roll call vote. Please allow for some delay up to 15 seconds as slides are loaded to the screen. This meeting will be audio and presentation visuals only, with no video for bandwidth and privacy reasons. When you want to speak, use the raise hand feature. Click on the participants button at the bottom middle section of the Zoom screen. A tab will pop out. On the bottom of the panelist area, not the attendee area, there is a raised hand option. Good evening and welcome to the Scottsdale Historic Preservation Commission meeting. The purpose of the Historic Preservation Commission, in part, is to establish standards necessary to preserve the historic character of resources designated historic, develop, maintain, and from time to time amend plans for the preservation of resources of historic significance in the city, and review proposed alterations to historic and archaeological resources through the Certificate of Appropriateness process. The agenda consists of the roll call, administrative report, minutes approval prior to the meeting, regular agenda items, non-action items. No vote will be made by the commission. Citizens wishing to speak on any agenda item may fill out a blue speaker card, or if not willing to speak, may fill out a yellow comment card and turn it into the staff table before the agenda item is to be discussed. You will be called by name when it is your turn to speak. When called, come to the table, state your name and address, and then begin speaking. Groups wishing to speak should select a spokesperson to represent the views of the group. To facilitate the meeting, your comment will be limited to 3 minutes for individual speakers, 1 additional minute for each additional individual present at the meeting who has contributed their time to a representative speaker, up to 10 minutes. I remind our audience that the review relates to historic preservation matters and does not include consideration of existing zoning district designations, zoning entitlements, or the allowed uses within zoning districts. After the public comments have ended, the applicant may have up to 5 minutes to respond to the public comments. The commission's motion may be to approve with modified stipulations, to deny the request, or to continue the case. Thank you for your interest and time. Now we will begin the meeting with the roll call.
Vice Chair Davis.
Present.
Commissioner Brousseau.
Present.
Commissioner Edmonds. Commissioner Fedock, absent. Commissioner Hosmer.
Present.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Present.
Thank you.
Tonight we have 1 public comment, so I'm going to call Linda Brown to the podium.
Hi, I'm Linda Brown from Villa Monterey 6 here in Scottsdale. We have been with the historical district since day 1, and I would like for the commissioners to please keep in mind that as you are deciding on whether to approve something or not, could you please refer to the plans and guidelines and where you got that ruling on, especially on not approving a certain item. We have had inconsistencies over the years, and that's where you find frustration from the homeowners, which is over 600 homes that are in the Villa Monterey. So that's what I'd like is for us, for when you do decide on anything tonight, what is the backup if you do decide no? Where is that written in the plans and guidelines? Thank you.
Thank you. The first action of the commission will be the administrative report by Doris McCray.
Vice Chair Davis and commission members, I don't have any items tonight for the administrative report. Thank you.
The next item of the commission will be the approval of the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the August 5th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Commissioner Edmonds, I second.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Now we proceed to the regular agenda. First on the agenda is 8-HP-2021 Bernstein Residence Edition.
Good evening, Vice Chair Davis and members of the commission. My name is Chris, to remind you. I'm here from the city, and I'm here to present 8-HP 2021, the Bernstein Residence. Next slide, please. Just to give you just a brief rundown of the subject property. It is located in the Village Grove 6 subdivision near the corner of 68th and McDowell. It is surrounded by single-family residential neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Here's a closer look at the site. It is on East Alameda Street. It is lot 21 of the Village Grove subdivision, which was platted and recorded in Scottsdale in 1957. And the main structure was constructed in 1957 as well. Next slide, please. Just the zoning again to remind you that it is R17 HP. Next slide, please. Some key considerations here. This case did come in front of the board back on August 5th, and it did get continued to gather a little bit more information on the proposal of this structure. Moving forward, there was some concerns over visible steel that is no longer going to be, there's no longer going to be any steel visible from the exterior. And then the applicant is also requesting to install a block wall as depicted in the pictures that you saw in our report. Next slide, please. Here's just a graphic of the proposed improvements. The applicant is willing to make some modifications to the structure to meet code. And here's on the screen, you can see a graphical description of the proposed improvements. Next slide. Here's just another angle, trying to give you a couple of different perspectives of the proposed improvements here. Next slide, please. This is kind of the view that I pulled up to make it look like you're looking from the street to get a view of what the structure would look like from a street view or a pedestrian perspective. Next slide. The action requested today is for a certificate of appropriateness, historical resources for modifications to an existing structure. Both the applicant and I are here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Mr. Zimmer, I appreciate you attending to this and working up the graphics. I think that was a great presentation you did to try to make this work. I do have a question for the applicant. Right there is fine.
Either one.
As I had mentioned, Mr. Bernstein, last month, what I had indicated was that if it's not considered in the front yard, then it doesn't have anything to do with the HPC. So the goal was to get this to what you wanted and get it out of our purview and not let it be, one of those things where you had to do a tremendous amount of expense. However, I'm still a little perplexed about how we take the sloping roof. When you've got a piece of steel that's a carport roof that is horizontal, it doesn't appear to have much of any slope on it. So, Mr. Zimmer, when you did your illustration, looking at it from the street, it looks as if the fascia starts to take it. That's a perfect example. Takes a tip down. And if it takes a tip down, what does that do when it reaches the steel joist further on? Because you're going to have to support the roof. The roof has to have structural members to support it. So you're not going to span from the edge of fascia, which is probably 16 inches away from the house, all the way back to the steel carport. And so I don't see how that's going to get resolved by just this front elevation. When you look at it at an angle, you're going to see basically a warp in the roof. And whereas I stressed about trying to get this to work for you, Mr. Bernstein, because I think we should be helpful to try to get you this achieved. But I just struggle with that, the steel I-beams. And I think by the fact that you're going to have to get somebody with a cutting torch to torch off the ends of those beams, what's the difference between shortening them and just taking them off at the point that we can hide it completely from the street view? And if your goal is that you still want to have approximately a 6-foot overhang, is that about what you're going to end up with?
It would be about a 4-foot
Okay.
overhang.
I mean, if that's really important, then maybe that ends up being done out of wood frame. How far apart are the steel columns that are the L-shaped structures that you have?
There's 3 columns,
Okay, so how far apart are those?
11 feet and 9 feet.
Yeah, so there's got to be support in order to hold up the roof. So there's 2 issues that I have. One is the slope of the roof isn't quite achieved because it'll warp the roof. And the other is, obviously with asphalt shingles, you can't run them flat or relatively flat. The recommendation is typically a 412 roof for asphalt shingles. People have done them at 212, and obviously it's your roof, and it probably wouldn't be an issue, but certainly an asphalt shingle installer probably isn't going to warranty something that gets too flat. But I think you're going to still go to a financial effort to get those trimmed. Is there really a point in keeping the 3 posts?
To me, that's the structural behind this cover. My intent was to put 2x6s on both sides of those beams or the support. And that will give, and then 2x6s every 2 feet from the house. So the beams, they won't be resting on the beams. They're going to be resting on the 2x6s on the beams. So I'll get the slope either 312, 412. It doesn't matter. I can make that happen really easy, and I can cut those structures off really easy. That's just a cut off saw. I can cut that. It's just
So if I understand you, you're thinking 2x6s in the web of each of the I-beams.
no, I'm thinking if you take the overhang, I can either attach 2x6s to the 2x6s, and that would give you structure, like most patios will tie into the 2x6s roof rafts. I can do it that way, and I can check with the code, or if I can just tie into the fascia, the 2x6 fascia of the roof with 2x6s coming out perpendicular with joists or hangers. And then that will give me the slope. So the beams, you will, and I intend to just put plywood underneath the beam, so it's going to be a flat roof, even though it's going to be a slope. Underneath, I want it just flat. But the beams are not going to have the slope of the roof on them. It's going to be the 2x6s that, to me, if I mount 2x6s on each side of those beams or the cross members, that will give me structural support, because nothing, added structural, because I'm still going to get support from the 2x6s every 2 feet along the whole fascia or the overhang.
So if you basically extended the tails on your existing roof, if you have a 2x6 roof, and you take the fascia off and take your freeze board off and you lap 2x6s at the same pitch of your original roof and carry them out 4 feet, then I think you've got the slope met and you've got everything else met. And it would probably be something that we'd have to look at the elevation to see if it was too obtrusive from the street, because it's going to come down lower.
Well, I got 4 feet, so if I do a 312, that'd be 9 inches or 12 inches a foot. So if I start, so the beams are 8 feet up, and the fascia is another 7 inches, 8 inches up. So I got a slope of 7. It's only going to come down, and I can bend, or I can take the steel beams and turn them down 3 inches, no problem. I can actually take them off.
Yeah,
and put 'em lower.
are those horizontal beams, are they bolted or are they
They're
welded?
bolted, so I can move that beam lower 6 inches and then still have a nice slope like I like it, or like a 412 for instance. Very easy. That would not be, if it's okay with the code, just to attach to the overhang with 2x6s perpendicular every 2 feet, which is standard roof. Are we clear on that?
I think so. I mean, I'm kind of getting where you're going, but so if you take the freeze board off and you extend your 2x6s, you're resting on the top plate that sits on top of your masonry. That's the best way to structure
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah,
Because you're only going 4 feet, you don't need a tremendous amount of structure there.
right.
But if you just put joist hangers on the fascia board and then cantilever something out, you'd have to have a beam or something to hold it at the outer edge. And if it's something that's as simple as just unbolting those 3 horizontal steel beams, I think you're better off just doing it in timber. And I think, and unfortunately, because I want to get you solved, but I think, Mr. Zimmer, I'd like to get more detail that would be approvable by engineering at the city. So if there's going to be a permit obtained for this, I want to see that we're doing it right. Because
Yeah.
just a discussion of how you're going to hang or clip, the rest of the structure, I don't want that to get haphazardly built and then us not like the look of it and potentially the city inspector say, this doesn't even, hold water. So I think in this case, for my vote anyway, I would like to see more detail on how you would do that. And my recommendation would be, unless you can give me some compelling reason why you'd keep the 3 steel beams there, I'd just remove them.
Well, if it's structurally sound without the beams, I don't need them. But I think they add a lot of structure to it, because once you attach a 2x6 at the end, a 12-foot 2x6 attached to those beams, that 2x6 on the end, the fascia, it's not going to move.
So you're talking about 2x6 on the outside face of the steel horizontal.
Right. coming all along, that'd be attached.
See, then
to-
you've got an elevation problem because that's running flat across there and going back to your roof isn't the right elevation unless you kick your roof higher up on the existing roof.
Okay,
I mean,
Yeah,
the
I-
geometry is a little tricky, so I think to make sure that you get what you want, but that it's also permittable and satisfying, at least me,
okay.
I think I'd like to see more detail, like a structural plan layout, what the connections are going to be and how that interfaces. In other words, some sections that would show
Okay.
where the steel horizontal beam is relative to the framing you're doing and how you're supporting the framing. The whole idea of building the wall in the front was to screen those columns and make that go away from a HPC standpoint. If you took those beams out totally, you could eliminate that wall and the gate.
Well, I want the wall and the gate. That's part of the plan now.
Okay.
I've
So-
moved to that.
And I know we had a discussion that I don't know exactly what the timing was of you filling in the carport, but on the block wall, and I think there was a discussion that you would be agreeable to do it in 8416 masonry,
Yes.
which therefore would match what's existing on the other side. And I think that's a great offer that you would do that.
Okay.
That would help tie it in. So if anybody else on the commission has any contrary opinions, thoughts?
Does anyone want to make a motion?
I think I'd like to make a motion that we unfortunately continue this case, getting additional
Okay.
details on the wood
Structure.
framing, dependent or independent of the steel structure, and some sections, so plan view, sections, and elevation. And if Mr. Zimmer is willing to help you with that,
Yeah, I appreciate that.
that'd be great.
Okay.
Anyway, I make a motion to do that accordingly.
Commissioner Hosmer and Vice Chair, just to clarify, did you want the applicant to go and talk to our building reviewers and go over the plans and make sure, is that also what you would like?
I would refer to Mr. Zimmer about, is this going to require a permit? The scale is pretty small, but if it requires a permit, then I would suggest that he meet with the building department before he wastes the time of getting it ready for permit, getting our approval, and then finding that it isn't structural.
Yes, Vice Chair Davis and Commissioner Hosmer, he will be required to get a permit with this, and that is the time that they would look at the structural drawings, but we can provide them coming the next meeting.
Okay, so to make it easy, that you don't have to hire a structural engineer, I think he could just talk about concepts to the building department, and between Mr. Zimmer and the building department, they might even be able to say, this is the way I would do it. And therefore you don't waste your time coming back and to get our approval. But I'd like to see that had happened before the continuance, so that we see that you've met with the building department, had a discussion, and have the drawings for my benefit to look at what we're doing to get that achieved. And Mr. Zimmer, also, if you did a isometric, that helps. And I think if we could see that, because the sloping roof here and the horizontal here aren't going to necessarily meet, there's going to be a little awkward. So I think if you can depict that accordingly, then we can see if that looks odd or whether it all ties together. Thank you.
Somewhere in here, we need a second. I'll second the motion.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmond,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next, we have 62 HP 2021 Kiva Crafts Center Rehabilitation.
Good evening, Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Ben Moriarty. I'm the coordinator for the Kiva Crafts Center. Case number 62 HP 2021. I'll just wait for the presentation. One moment. And next slide, please. The Kiva Craft Center is located in our Old Town core of the downtown, and it is off of Fifth Avenue. Next slide, please. The closer in bird's eye view will show that it's on the southeast corner of North Craftsman's Court and Fifth Avenue. Next slide, please. The site is zoned central business, downtown overlay, historic property. From this aerial view, you'll note the palm trees, and currently there's artificial turf in the courtyard area. Next slide, please. The request before you is for approval of certificate of appropriateness for the historic resource for rehabbing the site, including removing electrical conduit on the exterior of the buildings, new site improvements, such as shade structures in the breezeways and the courtyard, new signage, new lighting, painting the exterior, and restoring some of the components of this building to their original condition. Next slide, please. This is the proposed site plan. What I'll highlight on this plan is they're reintroducing a water feature in the courtyard. They are removing the artificial turf and reconfiguring the planter areas. And they're also adding in additional shade trees in one of the breezeways and in the courtyard. Next slide, please. This roof plan highlights the areas, the breezeways that will have new shade structures reintroduced. The original building had a roof, a ceiling in these areas that had been removed. I'm guessing in the 90s with that remodel. Next slide, please. These are the proposed elevations that also show those new shade structures in the breezeways. I apologize for the scale, hard to see from the back of the room. Next slide, please. They're also proposing, or these are the elevations from the courtyard view, excuse me. Next slide, please. These sections greater highlight some of the changes that they're proposing. They're changing the signage to be more in line with what was original of the building. And the section on the top right corner is one of the breezeway shade structures. And on the bottom right corner of the slide is a section of the new water feature. Next slide, please. These are the materials or the paint palette that they're proposing. The bottom images are from their historic research on the site and also some of the current site conditions. Next slide, please. With the repaint, they're also proposing a couple of wall sections to be graphic images taken from or inspired by Lloyd Kiva. Next slide, please. And these are the proposed graphics. Next slide, please. That concludes staff's presentation. The applicant also has a presentation. You'll remember that in June, they came before you with a little bit of a preview when they were pursuing their national registration for the historic property. Thank you.
Do I need to hold it down? Okay. Well, thank you, Vice Chair Davis and Commissioners. Again, I am Doug Sidnor, and I'm an architect representing the Kiva Craft Center Rehabilitation Project team. Joining me tonight is Don Ryden of Ryden Architects, an architectural firm specializing in historic preservation projects, and he has been active with the National Register of Historic Places nomination for this particular project. We have provided all of the city requested items on the review comments. Our brief presentation tonight does touch on a few of them, but not all. So I do refer you to the letter of responses and the updated narrative, which does address all items. Next slide, please. On your left is the late 1950s historic aerial. On the right, the original courtyard. Next slide, please. Another image of the courtyard on your left, and on the right is the Lloyd Kiva new studio. Next slide, please. And these are the original, existing conditions. And overall, it's in great shape, but it does need a little upgrading with the site improvements and the finishes on the structures. Next slide, please. This is our proposed site plan. The project really is focusing on the site improvements at the courtyard and the 5 breezeways that feed into it. It's really a wholesale change. All that we're retaining is most of the palm trees. We're intentionally trying to go back to the spirit of what it originally was. There's more open space. There's more landscaped planters. There's more generous seating. We're resurrecting the water feature where it originally was and capturing the flavor of that. Next slide, please. The water feature was touched on. It's at the west end of the courtyard, and it is in alignment with the west and north central breezeway. So as you enter off the street, you'll see that visual cue to kind of pull you in. The city asked that we do a separate standalone packet for the water feature. So that was provided. Next slide, please. I did want to touch on, though, that we are proposing this kind of spillway at the water feature. It'll obviously bring a very pleasant sound to the courtyard and psychologically cool the space down for people enjoying it. Next slide, please. The basin of it, we're proposing a custom mosaic tile work with the use of Murano glass tile, which is about 1 inch square. And it's primarily in the blue-green range, if you will. We're looking at linear and rectilinear elements to create a pattern that kind of suggests a movement in the basin. And it's also going to be dramatically lighted. Next slide, please. The seating, the original is on your left. It was wood framed. It deteriorated very quickly and was removed. But we really liked the floating quality of it. So one of our earlier sketches is on the right, but we want to kind of upgrade it with more durable materials. So the top would be more of a precast concrete unit supported by steel supports below. Next slide, please. And the details that you've requested are the pair off to the left and the series along the bottom. It's all been structurally engineered as well with the backup calculations. Next slide, please. The exterior elevations. The only serious change on the elevations is really there's a few non-conforming doors that don't match the wide style and glass panel doors that's the typical across the project. So we'd like to switch those out. And then there's just a half a dozen conditions where we want to recreate what it originally was. They did some unsightly band-aids over the years, if you will, and we want to address those, but they're very, very few. Next slide, please. And that applies to the courtyard elevations as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the colors, most you've seen before. There were some minor adjustments responding to the city comments, but I wanted to talk to the far right, which is really focusing on the exterior wood soffits. We learned with the lower right image on that magazine cover shot that it was originally a natural wood that was given a stain. And I actually pinned down the manufacturer of the stain and worked very hard to match that color in that image, which is the upper right one. But we have to give it a light sandblast before to remove the paint and then apply the stain. It's proven to be very, very costly. So we're treating it as an additive alternate. We'd like to afford it if we can, but if we cannot, we'd like to propose a paint that simulates that same coloration, which is the image just below the stain on the upper right. Next slide, please. We talked about the trellis structures. They're kind of a ghosted form of the original solid roof that spanned over the west and north central breezeways. It'll obviously filter the light. It provides some shading to some existing glazing below. It'll still maintain a sense of openness. And also we're trying to bring back a series of square roof openings that were in the original roof, even though they're in the trellis structure. We are proposing it be constructed of steel and metal components because we simply need the durability. We want it to last a long time and enjoy it for many years to come. Next slide, please. These are some of the earlier sketches of the trellis structures, which I think you've seen before. Next slide, please. More of the same. Next slide, please. And then this is the Western Breezeway with the framing plan on the lower right and all the associated details. It's also been structurally engineered, complete. Next slide, please. The lower details are for the northern breezeway. I also wanted to focus on the upper details, which you have not seen before. At the restaurant outdoor patio on the north side, there's an existing railing and stacked herb garden planters, and it's very unsightly, put it blunt. We'd like to redo all that with new railings and new raised planter details, which are on the upper left. So it really cleans it up. It's respecting the same plan. So that's been fine with the city for many, many years. It's serving alcohol and food on the exterior. Next slide, please. We're upgrading all the exterior signage. These are the two major identification signs. The left is on Fifth Avenue frontage. The one on the right is on Craftsman's Court. The client has found them more suited to hospitality projects, if you will. They're just a little too clever for everyone. There's been some pushback by the public over the years, and this is the moment where we hope to switch it all out. Next slide, please. On the left is the original courtyard image that we have. If you look at the back wall, you're seeing a typical tenant signage where it used a grid as a field and then applied a custom tenant sign onto it. We'd like to bring that particular detail back to capture that spirit. On the right are the existing tenant sign as an example. Next slide, please. So we'll look at the lower three details. The far left is that proposed tenant signage. It's based on an 8-inch grid that works with the concrete masonry unit module, and then the tenant signs applied to it. The middle one is the existing sign, but we've proposed to remove the rotated grid on the upper edge and the rotated name sign, if you will, adjacent to it. The far right is kind of our more tempered approach to the new signage. We think it'll have a more sophisticated character than what exists. Next slide, please. And just to touch on it, the east building south wall also has an identification sign facing the parking garage. It's the rotated version there. We'd like to remove it and then do a new sign to the left of it. It's more squared up with the architecture and more in keeping with all the other signage proposed. Next slide, please. We discovered at the 2-story southern building on its east edge, there's this outdoor patio with a stained glass structure up above. We have confirmed those 3 panels are the very same panels that are in the original image on the right in that central bay behind them. What we're proposing to do is remove them, store them, and in the future, come back and restore them and reinstall them in that structure. We're not able to disrupt the current tenant at the moment to do that, but one day when they may leave, then this would be a high priority. You also notice in the right image to the left side of it, There's another series of 3 panels, but it's a different glass technique that the Glass Art Studio did. Next image, please. And we've confirmed it was kind of a cast glass in this matrix you see. We actually have 9 of the original panels, only 3 are missing. They're in excellent condition. We'd like to also continue to store them and then create the 3 new panels and then reinstall them on the north side as well when that other work's being done. So I think it's a great story to see it through, but it's probably further out than the immediate project. Next slide, please. And the last feature, which was just touched on, we had 2 plaster panels facing Fifth Avenue, and we assumed that it came much later, long after the original. That's not the case. I found the evidence in the 1955 technical specs when I read every word of it, that those plaster panels were totally intentional and there was an art mural on them. Unfortunately, we never did find an image that shows those art murals. So we need to propose something to maybe bring them back and pay homage to what it once was. Next slide, please. So these are the 2 walls. They're kind of staggered in plan, but if you stand west of them, you actually can see both at the same time. So we're looking at the graphics of being a pairing that work together. Next slide, please. And we wanted the artwork of Lloyd Kiva New, our visionary and developer of the Kiva Craft Center in 1955 through 58, as a strong influence. And this is one of our favorites among his body of work. It's 1973 oil painting titled Indian Beadwork. And there are 3 aspects we want to kind of carry on. One is it's non-objective and abstract. Secondly, it's very geometrical. 3, it uses very bold, rich colors. Next slide, please. So our proposed pairing might look like this. We picked a centroid on the left plaster panel that aligns with the wall where it actually unveils that full plaster panel as you stand to the west in plan. Hard to explain, but that's why it's there. And it's elevated about 5 feet above the sidewalk line, which is the ideal viewing height when we look at artwork, as I've learned from my museum and gallery experience over the years. And then there's this kind of flared perspective that radiates out from that point. The other larger idea is that we have a lot of vehicular traffic on Fifth Avenue. We have a lot of pedestrian traffic on that public walkway into the breezes and the courtyard. And we want to capture that sense of movement. So through these flaring forms, dashed lines, a series of dots, we hope to capture that as well. This is simply a Prismacolor drawing. The real mural would be painted and much more opaque and much more rich and saturated than this suggests, but I think it gives you a clear idea of what we're suggesting. We also find the colors that we're proposing for the building at the lavender walls and the blue-gray beams and the landscaping below, it'd be a very contextual and integrated piece. We also think it's very respectful of the mid-century modern architectural character. So we think it's working on all cylinders in that regard. Next slide, please. And then in closing, there were just a couple comments I wanted to make for the record. As the applicant, we are agreeing to all of the staff report stipulations. I did confirm with our lighting engineer that the electrical drawings submitted already address all lighting related stipulations that you've reflected in that report. And for clarification on the published regular agenda item 4, our case, the following are no longer in the project scope. Removal of exterior exposed electrical conduits and wiring. That implies we're removing all of it. It is not technically, functionally possible. It's spaghetti out there, to be blunt. We are removing some that are not code compliant. We are visually upgrading it where we can. We want the owner to approach those that are responsible for the data to remove inactive wiring, but we cannot guarantee we're removing all of it. We will do all that is technically possible. Secondly, we are not burying the secondary power at the alleys, and we are not removing the 3 telephone poles, which there are 3 of. Those 2 items tallied up to $1,050,000. it was a serious budget buster. We just can't blend that into the project. It was all being done just to visually improve the alley on the backside of the project. In a perfect world, it would have been lovely, but we can't go there. So that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, Mr. Sidner, this is a fabulous project. It's one of my favorite buildings in Fifth Avenue. And you guys have spent a tremendous amount of time and effort, and it's wonderful. One of the things I'm more or less just going to give you some comments. I'm not opposing anything that's going on. The fountain, as I remember, was connected to the perfume gallery that was there. And I'm assuming that the reason the fountain didn't take the shape that it took back then is because it's a water hazard, a trip hazard, and you'd have to curb it. And
the original water feature was very close to where we propose it, and it was rectilinear, and it had a little spray within it. So there was some sound, even though we're proposing it to be different with the spillway. And it was flush with the surrounding walks. I think you're fine with it being flush as long as you don't exceed a certain depth of the water
like
feature.
18 inches or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
The water feature packet that's going to the water department, we know that it complies with all the requirements about depth and size and the details. And they were furnished all that. The perfume feature was outside that suite back in the earlier years, not original suite, it came a little later. And I think it was just the standalone feature that the tenant provided. It wasn't part of a larger water feature in the courtyard. Now, the feature that's out there now was done in 1993 when they too did a wholesale replacement of all the courtyard and breezeway site improvements at that time. And it's our client that's actually owned it since 1972. They got a lot of pushback about some of those improvements back then, and it's taken till now to make another run at it and do it differently and be more respectful of the original site improvements that were there. And we do have some historic images as evidence of what it was. And I've loved this place since I was a teenager. So I've known every square inch of this place since then. And so we're trying to bring that back.
Thank you. I love that fountain back then. And I think the perfume was more little samples that you could grab to smell. And
Yeah, he actually, I don't know, he flavored it.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me, because I had a family member that was in the stained glass studio back in those days, was that wall was the backdrop. That was the first thing you saw when you came into the courtyard. It was spectacular. Not only the glass wall, but the sand cast stained glass. And is there, I don't know that we can mandate necessarily that happen. And I know if it's his passion, he's probably going to do it. But if another tenant came in and said, I'm moving out, or so-and-so is moving out, but I want to move in, but I want that window right where it is, don't touch it, or I won't sign a lease. Does that then present a problem for restoring that wall that is so identifiable to the project?
It would, but I do think the property owner, of course, has every right to negotiate, a lease in its terms that suit the tenant and suit them. They love our idea of what we'd like to do, but F&B that's there is a very, very popular, successful restaurant. And they have a Beard Award-winning chef. I mean, it's taken seriously in the Valley. They don't want them going anywhere, and we don't want to do anything that disrupts their daily operation. So there was a feeling that this may be done later. I've met the chef, and she's a very collaborative kind of spirit. So I think there might be a moment where they might do it with her being there. They kind of have a down season in the summer, so maybe it can be targeted then. It needs a lot more conversation and negotiating to sort out when and how that might be done. But even with what's in the core project scope, I can't begin to tell you what the costs are in today's world,
Oh,
but it's stratospheric from where we all started. And the client is reaching quite high to do just what we're doing now. We know that we can't add too much more to it. There were a couple of other features that I went down a tangent and I thought it would be wonderful for the project, and we got all excited about it. And they were just so costly that we had to let a couple of them go. But we're holding on to the core program that will transform the complex for the next few decades. That's our hope.
Well, I certainly appreciate that there is all this effort and the expense to preserve it like he's doing, or like you're helping do. The palm trees, I noticed that there's a linear run of palm trees that makes a nice geometry through there. The bases are a little complicated when they meet other materials. And so are you removing, I think there was one or two at the west end. Was that just, I'm trying to, when I was there, I was thinking, why would we remove that palm tree? But speaking on behalf of the rest of the commission, these plans are pretty detailed, and reviewing them on the computer, looking at the PDFs and trying to understand all the details gets to be a little cumbersome, and no fault of anybody. But, you know, when you start looking at the keynotes and then going back and reading the plan, you know, it may not be the best interest of the commission to say, I'm going to spend 4 or 5 hours looking at this and reading the plan. So I'm trying to help them with the understanding of what some of those programs are. I don't care if the palm tree is gone. I think what you've done exemplifies your talent and your experience with preservation and respect to the project. But I was just curious about that palm tree.
Well, let's talk about the palm trees. They arrived in 1993. They're not the original trees.
Okay.
The owner and I jointly agreed we'd love to remove all of them. We just don't think they're fitting, but the cost and the logistics of doing it within that courtyard, given their size and existing structures, was really problematic. But when we proposed the West Breezeway have the trellis structure span over that linear gap where the roof once was, there are 3 palm trees that conflict with it.
Okay.
So
that's fine.
we agreed to remove just those 3, but we're salvaging all the remaining palm trees. Another detail that we haven't talked about tonight, but it's in the submittal. We'd like to take the base of the palm trees, while we're talking about the palms, and wrap it in a kind of a green cage.
Oh, green screen?
Yeah, and let the vines grow up it. So when you walk into the courtyard, it immediately communicates that this is an oasis-like garden. And there'll be a coolness to it and a greenery to it. And you're not looking at the base of palm trees, which are not the most attractive things when you're objective about it.
Yeah.
And then there's some dramatic lighting that reinforces all that idea. So we're coping with the palm trees. It's all that's being left from what exists, and then go from there. The plan of the palms are actually L-shaped and then
Right.
rotated within the geometry of the complex, which quite frankly, we found that a little problematic as well. It wasn't respecting the wall lines and the organization of it. It's kind of back to the rotations and the signs.
Sure.
It was kind of a hospitality-like driven idea. And I think it's just a little too much for the existing character.
So, and that's fine. I like that. I think there was something mentioned about retaining some of the boulders, and only because my peripheral vision is going bad as I get older. I tripped on one of those doggone guys and I was thinking, boy, that'd be nice if that guy wasn't there. Are you maintaining all the boulders or some of them being removed?
There's a dozen existing sandstone boulders that were handpicked by the architect up in Ash Fork back in 1993. And it was playing to the boulders that you find in the specialty retail and historic districts of Fifth Avenue, Craftsman's Court, and Marshall Way. That's where the idea came from, because this project was completed only a year or two after those streetscape improvements were done. They're there. I agree with your point about the trip hazards. They're mostly going to be relocated within the breezeways and in the planters. They're not going to be in the middle of the public walkways. We agree they can be a trip hazard. I'm trying to clean the courtyard out from them. I probably shouldn't be saying this here, but a little side story. I did the original phase 1 streetscape program for Fifth Avenue and Marshall Way in the mid 1980s. And one property owner wanted to bring sandstone boulders to the street. I said, I don't agree with that. I think the last thing we need is more clutter out here or more trip hazards. We're trying to kind of clean things up and make it easier for people to move around and shop and so on. And then we were done with our task. And then a year and a half later, they formed the assessment district. A different team came to the table. And guess what? We got sandstone boulders. So I never agreed with them since the mid 80s. And yet we have them in our immediate project. I think it would be a waste to simply try to dispose of them.
Yeah.
They're just part of the evolution of the place. And working with a very talented landscape architect, we've found new homes for them. And I think it's reinforcing what we're doing. And
So I noticed that the glass block pavers are going away, and you can't even identify them as glass block. It's too bad that there's not a product that can do what the intent was originally, but I understand and accept why they're going away. The stainless, I'm assuming it's stainless steel. It has something to do with the signage and also to do with a lot of the sconces that are on the project with sort of a brushed swirl patterns on. All of that type of look is going to go away, correct?
correct.
With the perforated metal.
Correct. We
Good.
did not feel that space age aesthetic was an appropriate.
Yeah, yeah. It
Detail.
wouldn't go with the style right now. I think that was probably the only other comment. Oh, on the lighting, and this is more my neglect. I was trying to carefully with the computer and the PDF zoom in, zoom out, and try to identify where all the different light fixtures are. And maybe you can just verbally tell me where they're going. The Del Toro wall-mounted blade is an interesting fixture. And so there are a couple of these are interesting anyway on their own, but what is going to be on that promenade along the covered sidewalk on the west side? At each one of those columns, there's some wall sconces. Which fixture of the ones that I'm looking at in the
First,
package?
I might first mention that there are 2 light fixtures for each column on the west side fronting on Craftsman's Court. We are removing one of the 2 at each of those columns that face Craftsman's Court. It'll all only be on the shaded arcade side. With that change, we are actually reinstalling new light fixtures where all of the existing column mounted and wall mounted fixtures currently exist. We are not trying to create new locations on those walls. As you know, this construction is exposed concrete masonry units, and there's not a lot of design flexibility. You're just running conduits anywhere you want. And the fact that hard work's already been done, we need to capitalize on that. But our fixtures we're proposing are much smaller. We find the existing ones, the original fixtures, if you don't know, are buried behind the shields that were added in 1993. And a lot of the lenses are cracked and yellowed and real tired. And the client literally has to dismantle this larger shield around it, the brushed stainless steel you mentioned, and then take the lens off and try and change a bulb. It's really been frustrating for them over the decades. So we want to go with a new fixture at those locations. Beyond that, The site improvements have been dramatically lit with the palette of light fixtures proposed by our lighting designer. And there's some uplights at trees. We want to make sure the walks are highlighted. I mentioned the lighting in the water feature will be very dramatic. There's lighting at the palm trees. We're really doing it in a subtle way so you can see where you're going and everyone feels safe and secure. But we're not encouraging blaring floodlights. That doesn't exist.
Right. I think all the bullets, those fixtures, a couple of the cans and so forth, and the under seat lighting, I see where all those go. What I was curious about is the WAC lighting. There's a round, relatively flush fixture. It's a 5-inch round. And then there's another one that's called Mod, and it's a 6-inch sconce. I was wondering where those two would be located. And then lastly, the one that looks like a blade, that's got it pulls itself 2 or 3 inches away from the wall. And it looks like a thin blade, vertical blade, probably 12 inches tall. Just in general, wanting to know where those fixtures go. And I can show you which ones I'm talking about if you want.
I think the blade fixture was an earlier idea, and the other fixtures you reference are what we're proposing now. There was a lot of logistical complexities at mounting some of those fixtures in the existing conditions, particularly at that column. And so I think the blade one is not part of the submittal. I can clarify that for you, but I don't remember what all the models you mentioned look like. I remember kind of their character, but most all of those are wall mounted or column mounted. There's nowhere else that they would go in the project.
Okay.
I might one last comment on lighting. There are some existing original recessed square fixtures in these wood soffits, including the West Arcade and other locations. We understand most all of them are still operational. We'd like to keep them and use them. And so we can count on that lighting as well, which is throughout the project.
Okay, so I think the round one is a ceiling mounted, so it's probably a soffit of some type. And then the other one is a sconce. And the sconce is a little bit different, and I'm trying to make a connection to the style of the architecture and the age of the building to that fixture. That's the only reason why that comes up. And obviously seeing the fixture in the flesh makes a big difference too. I used to go to the lighting rep stores and look at all their stuff, and you really realize that seeing it in the flesh makes a big difference. But
they're relatively small fixtures. We obviously found them in keeping with the mid-century modern aesthetic. I mean,
yeah,
that's why they were proposed.
And I happen to like lighting a lot, so that's why I even make a comment about it. I think overall, I think you're doing a wonderful job. I love the project, and I remember the lavender color that's coming back, and I thank the developer for having the interest to try to do this and do it right. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for your comments. I have to tell you, I've never done a lavender building in my life. But it was fascinating when we saw those original 1956 magazine cover photos. They're the only ones we found that were in color that was original. Everything else is black and white. And I thought just through the printing process, it discolored the walls a bit. I was just convinced in my mind that they were kind of a light gray and maybe the natural block. And then one day we were in one of the back patios behind a locked gate. I'd never been back there. And sure enough, someone had ripped the board off the wall and unveiled the original color. I go, it is lavender. And so we just got out our paint swatches and matched it. But I think all these colors of the lavender walls and the blue-green beams, they're all what I think Lloyd Kiva knew helped select, along with the architect T.S. Montgomery. I'm convinced Kiva was involved in that. Most architects wouldn't do that.
You could trust Kiva.
Yeah, so Kiva really had a touch on the colors of the buildings as well. He took his interest, care of that far. So I think it's really going to re-identify the project, and I think people are going to really enjoy it.
So I guess with that saying, I am going to make a motion to approve for certificate of appropriateness, case number 62 HP 2021.
I'd like to second that.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate your support. By the way, we hope to construct it late next spring through the summer, which is their slower retail season. We tried to pull it off this summer. That wasn't realistic. So it'll be a few months before you see us get underway. So thank you.
Historic Preservation Commission, Ben Moriarty again. I'll be presenting the Deneen artificial turf, case number 72 HP 2021. Next slide, please. The site is located in Villa Monterey, Unit 6. You'll note that's north of Chaparral Road. Next slide, please. A closer bird's eye view would show that it's on the northeast corner of North 77th Street and Pasadena Avenue. With this bird's eye view, you could see that the property on the left across the street from the subject site has a similar pad of artificial grass. Next slide, please. The zoning on the property is multifamily historic property, or R5 HP. Next slide, please. The request is for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the architect or the historic resource to replace a natural grass with the artificial grass. Next slide, please. This is a site rendering showing you where that pad of grass is existing. It's in the same configuration, just being proposed to be modified with artificial turf. Next slide. In surveying Villa Monterey 1 through 7, I apologize again for the scale of this graphic. There were a dozen other properties that had artificial turf in the front yard. Of those properties, 8 of them had the artificial turf prior to this district being a historic district. As you may recall, at the beginning of this year, the commission heard a case that included artificial turf. That site is highlighted in red. And the next case after this also has artificial turf as part of their proposal. And that is highlighted with the star at the top of the graphic. I will also note that the applicant has HOA approval for this proposal. And there's also a comment of support that came in today. Next slide, please. That concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is also here.
I'm not a fan of artificial turf. I understand a homeowner wanting to save water. I understand they want to preserve energy, etc. And it's low maintenance. There's a lot of reasons to want it. However, this is a historic district. And I had requested and got a clarification from you, Ben, on the comment that a text amendment was supported by the public with an opinion that synthetic art, let's see, is that the one I was talking about? Yeah. That it was appropriate for the desert, that was a planning comment or a text edit and had nothing to do with historic districts. So I find the use of artificial turf akin to putting vinyl siding on a wood building in a historic district, that I don't even see it as landscaping. It's not appropriate. And when people say it saves the environment, it kills healthy soil. It requires water to wash it. It retains heat. And I read even somewhere that the temperatures could get upwards of 200 degrees. There's off-gassing. And then the heat exhausts at night. It's a reservoir for fungus, bacteria, and other contaminated organic material. It cannot be recycled. You can put it in the bin, but technically it never gets recycled. And it uses a large carbon footprint. So therefore, it doesn't get my support.
Are there any other comments?
Ben, how many other units have the artificial turf in that area?
Vice Chair and Commissioner, can you repeat the question?
Did you tell us how many other units in that district had artificial turf?
Yes, in surveying the entire historic district, there were 12 other properties that had it in their front yard. Of those, like I mentioned, 8 of them had the artificial turf prior to it being a historic property. And if I may, this was a sample that Ms. Deneen brought in of, I believe, what's existing in her rear yard that she'd like to do in that front pad. Surveying the aerial photography, it appears that there are far more that have it in the rear yard as a landscape feature.
It's unfortunate that when this was done before the historic district was created, it appears as if that's permission. And some people probably installed this without going to the city to get a certificate of appropriateness. I don't know if of the 4 that were done afterwards, did they go through HPC to get approval for that? And was it under this watch, or was it, do we know the timing of that? One of the things that concerns me is if every property decided we want to put plastic in our front yard and paint it green, what would our community look like? And that worries me. Thank you.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer. In my research of the other 4 properties, I didn't see any recent activity that showed a certificate of no effect or a certificate of appropriateness through the HP commission. Now, we're on the cusp of going 100% digital. So in those years, there may have been paper approvals that haven't been scanned in. So I can't say with 100% certainty that those 4 properties didn't get an approval of some kind. But it is harder to tell between when the properties became a historic district and now when those artificial turfs were installed. To change out landscaping doesn't necessarily require a permit. So there is sometimes no stopgap until there's a code enforcement call, or it's in the act of actually changing out a wholesale landscape.
Well, if there aren't any further comments, I'm going to make a motion to deny case number 73 HP 2021.
I'd like to second that.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, could you repeat the case number?
73 HP 2021.
For clarity, it's 72 HP.
Oh, I'm sorry.
2021.
I had two folders open. I stand corrected. I want to recommend denial of case number 72 HP 2021.
And I'd like to second that.
And thank you for clarifying.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Historic Preservation Commission, Ben Moriarty again, just to remind you, and I'll be presenting the Di Giovanni residence, 73 HP 2021. Next slide, please. This property is located in Villa Monterey, Unit 7. It's of the upper crust of the historic district, and it's north of Chaparral Road. Next slide, please. This is a closer aerial bird's eye view of the property, and it is on East Bonita Drive in between 76th Place and 77th Street, approximately 400 feet as the crow flies from the previous case. Next slide, please. The zoning is multifamily historic property, or R5 HP. Next slide, please. And the action requested by the applicant is a certificate of appropriateness for the historic resource for replacement of windows, doors, exterior paint, removal of decorative iron, change of roof tiles, and replacement of landscape for artificial turf in the front. Next slide, please. This is a site graphic that depicts the front tiles that were changed out and the artificial turf area that approximates 900 square feet. Next slide, please. When the district became a historic district, this was the inventory photo taken in 2017. You'll note the saltillo tiles, some of the ironwork around the window, and the landscape in the front. Next slide, please. This image shows some of the work that was completed. The change with the ornamental ironwork, the change with the tiles, the paint change, and the turf. Next slide, please. Again, this was the graphic depicting the survey of the artificial turf. I also, while driving the neighborhood, tried to get a windshield survey of the different tiles, roof tiles that are present in the neighborhood. And Villa Monterey has a variety of roof tiles that are present, including what was the saltillo tiles previously, and the gray flat type of tiles in the neighborhood. Just for reference, there was about 34 different units that had the gray tile. Next slide, please. That concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's also here if you have any questions. In fact, I'll defer to the applicant to describe a little bit of the story that they've gone through as new homeowners, but also their contractor was working to resolve some of these issues when they were notified that they were in violation. Tragically, he passed away, but the homeowner could describe that.
I want to apologize first for not following the regular protocol and getting approval prior to this being done, I was under the assumption that my contractor had this under control. He did go to the HOA and get approval for all that we had done. And I just thought he knew about this historic preservation, which I didn't know anything about. I was out of town, and while he was doing it, living in another home. And when we did find out about it, I got the letter in the mail and told him about it. And he said, no, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. I'm taking care of it. And so I just assumed it was taken care of, that it was nothing to worry about. And then when I got another letter in the mail, I called, meanwhile, I called him again, and his wife had told me he passed away. And she was in the process of getting evicted from her place, didn't have the records of anything. So I was, stuck at, square one. I contacted the city, talked to another gentleman, Nate Tonemaker. And so Nate was working on it with him, remembered it. And so I started to work on it with Nate. And then I couldn't get a hold of Nate for a bit. And I guess Nate was no longer there anymore. And Ben took over. And I appreciate all you've done on it, Ben, to get it to where it's at right now. But unfortunately, everything's been done, and I'm at the mercy of you guys, and hope that you can take under consideration the extenuating circumstances.
So quick question. It's Ben Brousseau. I'm just curious, has the decorative ironwork been removed then?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Do we know where that went?
I don't know. It was rusting out, falling off, and
Yeah.
it wasn't, in my opinion, wasn't appealing.
Sure.
And I try to look around to see, and if you stand on my block and you look around, there's very few that even have theirs left up there.
There are very few, only 3 or 4, I believe, right? That still have the decorative ironwork. We had someone come up last year. He wanted to remove his so he could fit his truck in the carport, but we denied that request. I guess that's the main thing that I see. But if we don't know where it's at, hey, that's how it goes.
Mr. Giovanni, and I'm sorry you got stuck in the middle of this problem. It's a huge problem. It's a long list here. And I guess the first thing is with the HOA, and since they're not represented here, I can't speak to them, but I would assume that it's the HOA's responsibility to say, when you do these kind of wholesale changes, you need to get a permit. And obviously, if you're not in the mix with the contractor and the HOA, he could have forgotten or not carried that to the next step and gone to the city because he didn't tell you about it. So, I'm sorry you got in the middle of that, and it was an unfortunate circumstances. However, we've got 7 things here. We've got windows, doors, paint color, ironwork, roof tile, carport coating, and artificial turf. And I would look to you, Mr. Moriarty, about the color. I know there's a current trend, especially in the Arcadia area, where, in fact, even in North Scottsdale, where people are wanting to build a white house with black details, black paint, and so forth. And I think because it looks so stark and different, it probably doesn't meet the paint color criteria for Villa Monterey, but I would look to you to tell me that extra white is not in the palette. I don't have it at my fingertips, so I can't tell you that I have that answer.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, Villa Monterey is still acting underneath the interim guidelines for that subdivision. And a lot of times we're leaning on the HOA if their approval of it lines up with some of the historic pastels in the neighborhood. That being said, this subdivision, like many others of its kind, did have whites in their original palettes. Granted, sometimes they had a different hue to them. But the applicant did reach out to the HOA He had the original letter that the contractor was able to get from the HOA for some of the improvements, and he reached back out to the HOA for the rest of the improvements. And the HOA, as you stated, Commissioner Hosmer, said typically we would ask you to go get the certificate of appropriateness after our approval. Since it's already happened, we could generally say that we'd approve these, but it was out of order. If that answers your question.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we could peck at each one of these so we can figure out where we need to discuss further, starting with the windows. I'm just going to throw out what my thoughts are on there, and then the rest of the commission can chime in or respond accordingly. On the windows, wherever this case goes, if you've taken the windows that were originally there, you've done the right proportions, the right colors, everything is per the guidelines, then I would recommend that we get an application that shows exactly what was there, what was done, or as best you can. And then it's just more of a rubber stamp. Because it sounds like from the report, the window openings, the mullions and everything, nothing's changed. But because there's nothing in the file, I think it's only appropriate to have you put something together. And just like Mr. Zimmerman, maybe we can ask Mr. Moriarty to spend some time at the drafting table. And I'm kidding, but I think we need to get an application for the windows so that we can, and the doors, so that we can put those behind us, because it appears that those are not big issues. The paint color, I think we can have a discussion on whether the white is appropriate or not. I know there are some gray accents out there, different colors of gray and so forth. It's just, I think what we want to keep away from is something that doesn't look like the pastels that were built within the center, within the historic district. White and black, or white and dark gray don't appear to be appropriate in there, but I think it's open for discussion. The ironwork, it's easy to take a photograph and go to an ironworker and say, can you make something similar to this? Again, I think that's a discussion that the commission can have about whether we ask you to redo that and put that back on the building. The roof change, it's not just that you change the tile from clay tile to concrete tile, but it's that you change the shape and the color. And therefore, I think that, again, is something that should probably go back to what it was. And we could, again, have that discussion. The carport coating, you're only doing the carport. You're not doing the driveway, correct?
Correct.
And that is already done, right? So that's a tough call because it's a little bit more personal. You don't see it from the street. Your car's sitting over top of it. And I don't think anybody's ever come to the board, at least when I've been on the board, to say, I'm going to put an epoxy coating where I park my car. And I would assume that if one were to walk the districts out there, a lot of people have colored epoxy underneath the carports. So in my opinion on that one, I would probably, maybe the color won't match going back to pastels, but I don't know that the carport finish, not the driveway, but the carport finish is probably a non-issue for me. Then the artificial turf, need I say more? So I open this up for discussion with the rest of the members.
I have a question. Why were the Spanish tiles replaced?
I had my roof redone as well, recoated, foamed, and he said that there were several tiles that were needed to be replaced. And truthfully, they were hideous. That tile looked hideous. It didn't look right. The way it laid on the house, and to me, it was an eyesore. So if I'm going to live in the house and pull up to it every day, I wanted, I was spending the money to get everything fixed. I wanted to pull up to something that I liked. So that's what I did. I drove around the neighborhood. There were several that had the same tiles that I did, colors. several white houses with black trim or gray trim. There's 2 or 3 right next door to me. So that's kind of the thought pattern that I had.
Thank you. I have a question for you. Are the other gray tiles original? Do you know, or were they replaced before the district became historic? Do you have any information on those?
Sure, Vice Chair. The most of the information I could find is at the inventory photos. And that's when the district became a historic district. I didn't have any historic documents of the original roofs prior to the district becoming a historic district. But most of those 34 others were in place before it became a historic district.
I gotta say, guys, it's been Brousseau. I'm just a little shocked that with how vocal the different HOAs within each of the regimes has been with us over the years. I'm shocked that this was even allowed. Like whomever was the head of that particular regime, it just doesn't make any sense to me that they wouldn't tell your builder, take it to the city, take it to the commission. No, this is a historic district. Don't do anything. Just call them, like it's incredible to me because everybody else has been so great and so vocal. And they come in here if they have questions. I mean, it's just like the exact opposite of what I would expect from Villa Monterey. It's too bad.
If there's no other comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion. I think what I'd like to see happen here is the applicant come back and do the doors and the windows as a change so that we can see that it was actually in compliance. And then with your help, Ben, on the paint colors, I just want to make sure that now, don't we have lists of colors and color samples or swatches that were part of the interim guidelines?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, I believe there was a case that was brought forward that had a palette from one of the units. I'll look to Doris for clarification.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, the guidelines that you were working on with Villa Monterey that haven't been approved, but they were working, you had a draft. And in that draft was appendix for the HOAs with their color palette. And we were deferring to the HOAs with that color palette. And so that's how we were dealing with the color. And if it met the HOA, then we were giving it a certificate of no effect based on that color palette on that active Villa Monterey design guidelines case.
Okay, thank you. And so Ben, would you say that that is one of these do meet that criteria then from the HOA?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, yes, I believe with the HOA's approval of those colors that they met their standards.
Okay, so my recommendation is going to be to, I guess, because we need you to come back, is to continue the case number 73 HP 2021 to reapply for windows and doors. The report can state that the paint color is approved by the HOA and therefore a non-issue. I would like to see in my motion, the ironwork, whatever documentation we have that presented. I'm not saying we're going to have you do that, but I think we need to see what the ironwork looked like where it was on the building. The roof tile is unacceptable and the artificial turf is unacceptable. And I think there are a number of things still that are acceptable here. So I think you're not going to lose everything on here that you've already done. So my motion to clarify, is applicant redo for windows and doors and illustration on the ironwork, and delete the roof or change the roof tile back and delete the artificial turf. Thank you.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, just for clarification, when you ask for the windows and door details, do you want him to give us the manufacturer details of what he installed?
No, I think we just keep it simple. I think if you want to, and maybe this doesn't even require an illustration. I think if we need to have something that documented, I don't know, Ben, do we have any photographs from the original house before it was modified with the windows?
Yeah, Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, we had that inventory photo. I looked at the applicant if he had photos more updated than the inventory photo, but if we could scroll to that.
That's fine for me. I think if we can have that as part of the applicant's exhibit to show I am asking for approval for appropriateness for the windows based upon this to what's in the current, then I think that's fair.
If I may, is this sufficient for that decision?
Yes, it is to me for my motion.
Okay.
The other commissioners can disagree and ask for more detail and we can change that, but
Pardon me, just for clarity. So you want to see this back similar to what
so
you're seeing?
I'm
here?
sorry. So this illustration right here was in the packet?
This is provided as part of the presentation, staff presentation.
Was it in our packet?
No.
Okay, well, that's where I didn't see that before.
Oh, well. As an attachment, but we could specify if you need greater specification to stipulate to, if that's what you're hoping for.
Okay, well, I think with that being said, that we don't need to do that then for the doors and the windows. And the paint color. So my motion will change and I'm going to make a motion to have an illustration or documentation of, is there any way to get a better view of that ironwork? I think what's unfortunate was we're going to lose all the ironwork in Villa Monterey if we start letting these things slip away. Does this ironwork go over the carport window as well as the main window? It's hard to tell from this distance.
No, they didn't. There was nine. It was just columns of on each side of that window right there in the front that went up and down, holding that little overhang up.
Okay, and maybe it's fair that I retract my motion and open this back up for discussion with the commission, what they would like to see you do for the ironwork. Do we have any discussion?
I don't know what you would possibly do. I mean, it would be cost prohibitive probably to go and hire somebody to recast the iron or the original ironwork. I mean, has anybody ever documented specifically which houses within Villa Monterey have the ironwork? We don't have that. Should go around and take photos, just get it down now.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Brousseau, we have the inventory photos, but we don't have a spreadsheet or anything like that of the houses with the ironwork on it.
So, Mr. Brousseau, the ironwork a lot of times is just either solid bar or, solid or even tube that is often just welded together. Right. It's not necessarily cast. So it's actually something that somebody that makes wrought iron gates could put together.
Sure.
So I don't think it's that cost prohibitive. In fact, if you go to Arizona Iron or, one of these companies, they actually sell the curlicues, the pre-manufactured pieces and parts. So it's pretty doable to have something made.
I mean, I can't right now. I mean, I can kind of imagine what it looks like, but right off the top of my head, I don't know. So thank you for that clarification. I think that should be definitely a recommendation. I mean, why not? It should be something that you are proud of as a historic homeowner, that you're one of the few that have that still. Or maybe it's like replicated and put on the home of somebody who maybe wants it, or somebody that would voluntarily, feature that on their house if it's something that this homeowner, doesn't like. I don't know, kind of at a loss here, but I would like to see it, restored.
Okay, with that being said, I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we are going to approve case number 73 HP 2021 with stipulations that the ironwork be restored to a similar configuration to the existing and replaced on the building, and the roof tile be replaced to a similar color and style as existing, and that the artificial turf be removed.
I'll second that with a modification. You said the roof tile should be replaced in similar color as existing. I think you meant as previously was existing, not as existing now.
Prior to the remodel, yes.
Okay, I'll second that.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, I just want to clarify for the record. So you're approving the paint color and the windows and doors. Is that correct?
And the carport coating. Yes.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Good evening, Vice Chair Davis and members of the commission. My name is Desiree Mayo, and I'm here to present case 78 HP 2021. Next slide, please. This case is the request for approval for a certificate of appropriateness and approval for historic residential exterior rehabilitation program funding to replace 11 windows on a home in the Village Grove Historic District. Next slide, please. Here you can see the location of the subject parcel. The property is adjacent to existing single-family residences zoned R17 HP in Village Grove to the north, south, east, and west. Next slide, please. Here's a closer look at the site location. The subject property is located on the north side of East Almeria Road and east of North 68th Street. Next slide, please. The site is zoned R17 Single Family Residential District with Historic Property Overlay. The historic property designation was approved for Village Grove 1 through 6 by City Council on June 7, 2005. Next slide, please. Here are photos of the existing windows to be replaced with the HRER funding. Next slide, please. And here are 4 more windows shown here. Next slide, please. And the last 3 are shown here. Next slide, please. Here are both estimates for the window replacement. The applicant obtained 2 bids for replacement of the windows, one at $15,336.18 and one at $16,865.95. and is requesting 50% of the value of the highest estimate not to exceed the maximum funding of $7,500 for the eligible improvements as outlined in the Historic Residential Exterior Rehabilitation Program. Next slide, please. To summarize, this case is the request for approval of a certificate of appropriateness and approval for HRER program funding to replace 11 windows on a home in the Village Grove Historic District. There has been one public comment received in support of the request. Next slide, please. And this concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Is the applicant here? I just have one question for you. It looked like on the bid, you're going to do a dark anodized, sort of a bronze color.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the intent, but again, subject to approval.
Okay, but you obviously want to go with a factory color.
Correct.
Okay, because I think one bid may not have said anything about the color.
One bid was a kind of a black brown, and I guess the anodized brown or anodized color is I guess the name is misleading because it's more of almost like a flat, darker color. And the anodized part really doesn't come through. And I saw an example of it. And that's the only reason why I chose that.
Okay, well, as always, I commend you for wanting to improve your property and take advantage of the HRER and to just in general make improvements to your neighborhood.
Sure.
I have one question. Will all the windows being replaced have the buttons?
As I was instructed, or talking to staff members, is that the windows that needed to have the match grid and everything were the ones that were facing the street and or visible from the street. So I identified the windows that would be, and I believe it's Windows 7 through 11, which included the carport.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, Mr. Tolles, when I looked at the bids, and I may be wrong, but I thought the bids showed little illustrations and they matched exactly because I went through all 11 windows and looked at your pictures of your house and matched them to the bid, and they all showed muttons. I'd call it 2x3, 2x4, 2x5,
Yes, sir.
the profiles. And they all look to be identified as having the muttons. Is that not the case?
There was one bid that, and I don't know if Desiree, I submitted the pictures of the bid of the contractor that I was actually going to go with. He was late to the game as far as providing illustrations, but when I submitted the application, the illustrations I had were for the one bid. And yes, they indicated the grids or the muttons that were going to be present in every window. But that essentially was a mistake because the intent was to have just the windows that were street facing or greenbelt facing visible to the public. Those windows would have the grid pattern on it.
Ms. Mayo, do you have illustrations you could put up on, let's look at the photographs again of the actual house. We don't have jurisdiction for what's in the back. I think the only thing that might come into play, and maybe we need to discuss whether we have the ability to put HRER funding to something that's not part of historic preservation, which would then only apply to the front windows. Can you clarify that, Ms. McClay?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, you can do funding for additions that would be in the rear yard. So it's exterior improvements, but it would be your call for the funding, but we have had funding for windows and the entire roof on, even though it's in the rear of the yard and the windows in the rear of the yard and the addition in the rear of the yard. So those have been approved in prior applications.
Okay, so I understand for a roof where you can't fake the back, I mean, it's a roof's a roof, it's all encompassing. The windows creates a little bit of a gray area because it really doesn't have anything to do with preservation, but I want you to get the best value out of what you're applying for. So if you could, Ms. Mayo, go to the floor plan of the house. There was one that showed all 11 windows so that we can understand there. Well, yeah, that won't work. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out, there's some that are on the angle. Sometimes you have windows that you can see from the street, but they're somewhat on the side. If they're in the back on the side, we don't have anything to do with that. But I'd like to see things, especially like because you're near a corner.
Well, if you look at that, I believe,
Maybe it was on a bid that I saw the floor plan. That was probably the illustration that I was looking at.
I think it's the next slide of pictures, if you could move that.
And Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, just wanted to put your attention to attachment 5, which is the floor plan. And it's numbered, the windows are numbered.
It should be 7.
And I think they coordinate with the pictures on
Yes, they do.
attachment 6.
So the first picture or the first window that would actually be visible from the street would be the top right. That's the master bedroom on the, I guess that would be the southwest corner of the property. And then it would move to that picture down below, which would be the master bedroom as well, directly facing Almeria Street.
So do you have the bids that were in the packet that we got?
I have Chris is gonna give you the,
Perfect.
yeah.
Okay. So what I'm looking at, I would say the windows potentially 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 6 might be, which is a bathroom, might be a
That's
little.
behind the fence line.
Okay,
and you
then
can't see it.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11 would be with Muttons.
Correct.
And then 1 through 6 would be whatever you wanted to do.
Essentially the exact same window without
Okay, and
grid.
as I've always said, or I've said before, even though it's not in our jurisdiction, I really recommend that you embrace the historic nature of it and love the fact that you've got a historic house and try to make it 360, go all the way
Okay.
around. But we can't tell you to do that. I'm just recommending that you do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments?
Then I'll go ahead and make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve case number 78 HP 2021 with the stipulation that the Muttons apply to windows 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and that they're all going to be approximately the dark bronze in color.
Mhm.
And this would be for the certificate of appropriateness.
I second the motion.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Rousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds.
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Thank you.
If I may, can we have a discussion about before there's a motion on the HRER funding with the other commissioners as it applies to the windows 1 through 6.
Well, I agree with you, Commissioner Husmer, that I would prefer to see the buttons on all the windows. I understand the cost is additional cost for the homeowner. But I feel that any improvements to the house would be a good thing in a historic district. So I think the historic funds are appropriate in this case.
It would be hard to sell me on having buttons on a window that I don't need to have buttons on. That's all I'm going to say. You know, like,
I'm sorry, say that
it
again.
would be hard to sell me on that to get me to if I'm upgrading and modernizing my home and those back windows are not part of the elevation, they're not part, but then I see where you're coming from. If it's city funding and dollars from the city that are going to pay for that, or that's maybe another discussion, altogether. But it'd be tough to get me to sign off on that, let's say. Though I do think they're quite charming. I do like them, but maybe not on the back windows.
Ms. McClay, could you clarify where HRER funding applies in different examples? Like, I know it's roofing and windows and doors and things like that. Can you tell us any other pieces and parts that this would apply to?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer. The exterior improvements, as I said, if you were doing an addition to the structure, it'll also comply. I don't have the list in front of me, but there is on our website, the list of exterior improvements, but it doesn't apply for interior improvements. It's only the exterior. And it doesn't apply for landscaping or painting, so those are the ones I can remember.
So I think we need to know the precedents we'll set if we go one way or the other, because one of the things that concerns me is we always get cases where somebody said, well, somebody else was allowed to do this. And as the gal that spoke at the beginning that gave a card, she wants us to be consistent. And I absolutely believe that that's what's important for us to do, is be consistent with our judgments. So I think we need to think about that. If somebody were going to re-stucco their home, do improvements that are on the back of the house as well as the front of the house, is it appropriate to apply those funds to those kind of things, or should we limit it to what's only visible?
Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioner Hosmer, just so you know, there's been previous cases on windows, and it's been all the windows that have been approved, and for all the funding cases that we have, it hasn't been specific windows. What I would suggest is, if you want to, we can agendize an item to discuss and look into the funding program. And if you want to make changes to that funding program, we can have that discussion, and then you can pursue that.
So we could decide to potentially approve the HRER funding, but in any future case, we could make a rule about where the HRER funding is applied and change the ruling so everything going forward would be real specifically outlined. Is that correct?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer, you could have that discussion. I would want our legal department to be here for that discussion to make sure that we were treating everybody fairly. But that is something that we can put on our agenda, and we can bring that program forward with all the requirements and have a discussion.
I'm going to ask the applicant then, what's the difference between the cost of doing the muttons on the back of the house versus not? Is it significant?
If I'm if I understand correctly, depending on the size of the window, it could be anywhere from $150 to $375 per window.
Okay, so it adds up quickly.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion?
Ms. McClay, you said that in previous cases, we have approved funding for front and back. Is that correct?
Vice Chair Davis and Commissioner Edmonds, yes, we have approved funding for all the windows.
Okay, so
regardless.
unless we change that ruling down the road, we probably need to follow precedent. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay, thank you.
Well, for that, then I will make a recommendation to approve for HRER funding the applicant's request for case number 78 HP 2021.
I'll second that, please.
Vice Chair Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Brousseau,
Yes.
Commissioner Edmonds,
Yes.
Commissioner Hosmer,
Yes.
Commissioner Kinchin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, there's a presentation by the city's Office of Communications.
Hello, members of the Historic Preservation Commission. My name is Kelly Corset. I'm Scottsdale's Communications and Public Affairs Director. And I'm here to have a conversation with you about the city's overall communications programs and approaches, and listen to ideas that you may have related to communications to support the various programs and initiatives under your purview. Next slide, please. So overall, when we think about communications, these are some of the questions that we ask you to consider upfront, or things that we consider upfront. Considering communications goals, what is it that you want people to know or do? Who is it who needs to know about it? And finally, how will we tell them? Those are kind of the three main things that we look at when we're developing communications programs. So I'm not asking you those questions now. I'm just presenting those as a little bit of a framework for how we go about creating communications on behalf of the city. Next slide, please. I did provide a handout because I thought that might be helpful to have in front of you, but just some information that we use when we are working on different communications programs for the city. This is data that we gathered in the 2020 community survey that we did here in Scottsdale. And the two colored bars on the page are the orange bar is a random sample statistically valid survey portion of the survey that we do, where the professional survey company that we use selects households at random to participate, and therefore we have a representative sample there. And those numbers we are confident are represent the entire community within a plus or minus 5%. The blue bar is an open survey that we do along with the random sample survey. So between those two surveys, we heard from about 1,300 different residents of Scottsdale, and that's who gave us this information. They answer all kinds of questions on the community survey. This is just one question where we try to find out, we've done this over a number of years, where are residents getting information about the city? And these numbers have held honestly fairly steady over the past few surveys. Word of mouth always is one of the top sources of information. People talk to each other, they learn about things from their neighbors, from their friends, from their coworkers, et cetera. The city's website is another key place where people get information, and we're happy to hear that. We put a lot of effort into putting information on the website. The local newspapers, TV or radio news. So the news media are still a major source of information for our residents. And then you can see other things that we do to communicate with residents and how they stack up. One thing that has always rated pretty consistently high, even with the rise of the internet and social media, is our utility bill newsletter. So people in Scottsdale, still quite a few people, the majority, get a paper utility bill. And we 6 times a year put a newsletter in that utility bill. Hopefully that's something some of you get and read. Above that is an e-newsletter that we do. Right now we're doing it twice a week. And that's also called Scottsdale Update. And so that is a substantial source of information as well. And there are a couple of other sources on there, including the Scottsdale Video Network, Channel 11, which is our 24/7 government TV channel, available to Cox subscribers and also streaming live online. So the overall takeaway is just to give you a little bit of data about where people are generally getting their information about the things that the city is doing, and some of the points of data that we use when we're trying to develop communications programs, determining how can we get the word out to people. Next slide, please. So this strange graphic is something that we use amongst our various communications teams to consider all of the different ways that we as a city have for communicating with the public. And the key really is right in the middle. And for many years now, we have considered our website to be what we call our home base of communications. This is a hub and spoke model. ScottsdaleAZ.gov is our hub. So whenever we're doing any one of these spokes, which are different specific channels of communication, we want to make sure that we have good information on the website. People are somewhere around 200,000 visits per month to the city's website. So quite a bit of use, and really a key as backed up by the data on the previous slide. These different spokes represent some of the different things that we do to communicate. We still do print direct. I mentioned the utility bill newsletter. We do some specific mailers. Planning does those for project notification and things like that. Electronic direct, the one above that, is in the form of e-newsletters that I mentioned. We have the general city news e-newsletter that goes out a couple times a month. We also have a variety of different newsletters in different areas. Library, Parks and Rec, a lot of different departments have e-newsletters. The P&Z link is one that is popular for people trying to just kind of keep track on what's going on from a planning perspective. I mentioned the video side of things. So in addition to our Scottsdale Video Network on Channel 11, we do a lot of original productions as well, share those via YouTube and other social media sites. And then increasingly, we're doing more and more live streaming also. And of course, this meeting tonight is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. I mentioned the news media as well. So we interact with the news media on a daily basis, either sending out news releases, attempting to get them to come and talk about something that we're interested in publicizing and promoting, or reaction, taking questions from the media, helping them get the information they need. And then occasionally we'll also work with mayor, council, others to get opinion columns out there as another means of tapping into the big audience that the news media has. From there, social media, this of course has been around quite a while now and continues to be an important part of our mix. We are present on a variety of social media channels. The biggies, Facebook, Twitter. Nextdoor is a very large presence in Scottsdale. Last time I looked, there are, I think, more than 90,000 Nextdoor accounts within the city of Scottsdale. So a lot of people are on that platform, and we use that to share information with folks there.
And then we're on platforms like Instagram, and even the library has gotten into TikTok as well. So we're trying to stay on top of things and reach all of the different people in Scottsdale in the different ways that they like to consume information. And then finally, face-to-face is still viable, a little less viable these days than it was about 18 months ago. But public meetings, open houses, citizen orientation programs, things like that, we will hopefully be able to return to those in a much larger fashion, because interacting face-to-face, we think, is still a very important way to help people understand the different things that the city is doing. So that's the overall communications landscape that we look at from a city perspective. And I thought it'd be helpful for you all to know a little bit more about where our residents are getting their information about the city and the different ways that we attempt to reach them. So next slide, please. That's really the bulk of the presentation. To set the stage for you all to think about different things that that you might want to do, I lead you back to those main questions. What is it you want people to know or to do? Who are those people? Are they a specific audience? Is it all residents? And then we can work on how we will tell them. I have had a couple of conversations with Commissioner Brousseau over the past couple of years and have some interesting ideas. My team supports the entire city. I have, in addition to the video staff, I have a team of public information officers, a public affairs specialists, small team, but a mighty team. And so we do have some resources that we can apply to help people understand the different things that we are, that we offer, some of the programs that that you were administering tonight, and other topics as well. In addition, I think we like to tell good stories about Scottsdale and grow our audience that way. And one of the things that we have learned in the past couple of years out of the citizen service team that's also part of my department in this building is people like history. They're interested in history. They're interested in Scottsdale's history. And I think a lot of the things that you're involved with are certainly a part of that as well. So I do think there are some opportunities for us to advance the initiatives of this commission through our city communications channels. And at this point, I'm really, I'm all ears to listen to what it is you all have to say, and then we can talk about potential ways forward. Thank you.
I have a quick question. To what do you attribute the limited usage of the Channel 11?
Commissioner Edmonds, members of the commission, I think it's simply competition. I think with all of our communications, there is an incredible amount of competition out there for people's attention. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, depending on your perspective, there are a limited number of folks that are going to sit home and choose Channel 11 versus A&E or History Channel or ESPN. It is a very important part of what we do. Certainly the transparency perspective, the letting residents participate in their government, at least by observing bodies like this one, and of course the City Council and others. And it's great that we have the ability to produce different videos to help publicize different programs. But ultimately, the numbers for the video network have stayed about where they are. About 25% of the people consider that an information source. The other things we have to recognize too is, although Cox is pretty much the only game in town, there are a lot of people who have gotten away from cable TV. So that's why we are looking and leaning more heavily on the live stream and original video distribution via social media as well.
Well, I don't think that there's any doubt that probably the best way for us to get our message out there is through video. But I mean, like tonight's meeting, I don't know if you were here earlier, Kelly, with Sidnor, what he was talking about. I mean, that's the type of project that everybody can relate to. And, you know, to hear Peter's, you know, background, his being from Scottsdale and all those things. I mean, I even remember going there for the first time when I went to BS West when I was like 21. I mean, I'll never forget walking through the Kiva Center for the first time. I think that there should be more of that. I wish that there was more of that organically happening without us having to push it too hard. But yeah, so I guess what we had talked about in the last meeting, Doris, was taking some of these ideas and expanding upon them. And instead of printing a bunch of stuff, taking that message and moving it further and faster with video. So I'm here to help out in any way, but the clock is ticking. First year, I guess I'm a second term commissioner now, rounding up my first year in the second term. So I've only got 2 years left. And I feel like I just haven't done as much as I could have done to date. So yeah, whatever we all decide, I'm here, action, ready to go.
Do you get any statistics on the age group of people that are doing the surveys that you're pursuing? And somewhat even the demographics, like is there a general age group that responds to or has interest in the city more than others?
Commissioner Hosmer, members of the commission, we do get some demographic crosstabs on this data. I don't have it in memory, but generally, it probably won't surprise you that the older the population in Scottsdale, the higher they rate things and the more they appear to be engaged. We do fully recognize that the city doesn't have as much success reaching folks in, say, that 18 to 34 demographic. So that's the one thing that I can say with confidence based on the data that I've looked at, and which is another reason we are continually looking for different ways to reach people that maybe aren't plugged into these typical ways that we do things. And I will say that knowing what I know about the work of the commission and the landscape of historic preservation in Scottsdale, I agree with Commissioner Brousseau. I think there's some opportunities to do some interesting storytelling with video, and that's certainly a capability we have. So I'm certainly on board and supportive of working with the commission, however you decide you want to do that, to develop some video programming that we can share via our different channels. I think that would be an effective way to help bring some more awareness to the number of historic properties that we have in Scottsdale and the kinds of things that we are doing as a city to help preserve them.
Yeah, or even what's next, I mean, what's the next thing, in historic preservation? I could think of probably 10 people, members of the Scottsdale community, that are more than willing to join us for that. It's always good to have different people in the mix. So where do we start, guys? I mean, are we still going to be doing our that weekend? If we usually do like a Saturday, that's probably not till January.
Vice Chair and Commissioners, whatever you decide you want to do in pursuing this, we can set up a retreat or, so whatever format you want to go forward with, or you want to direct Kelly to start establishing some kind of programs.
Ben, I think in the meeting minutes that we approved, it mentioned that we were going to do some kind of a retreat or special event I'm trying to find where that is. In the meeting minutes at the end, it said, I'm just looking here. Oh, board discussed publicity pamphlet and requesting special in-person meeting retreat in the fall. So that's coming right around the corner.
Sure is.
And then partnering with the library for archival files. So we should, I know at least me personally, September, October gets to be a busy month But it would be nice to get something on a calendar that we could do that retreat, in-person meeting to talk about that further. So
I couldn't agree with you more, Peter. Maybe we throw out a date.
Vice Chair and Commissioners, so I just requested Kelly Corset to be here to see if he could help with the direction of before we have that retreat. But then we can schedule that. Did you want Kelly at that retreat? How do you want to handle that? What is going to be on that agenda for that retreat?
Good question. I mean, perhaps what we do is, Kelly, I don't know that you necessarily need to make yourself available on a Saturday, but gee, I'm just kind of coming up at a loss for words here, like how to move forward with this, because we have to all be together, but we can't because, of course, we're a commission, so there's open meeting, laws.
Well, because a few of us have the privilege of being retired. We could do it, it doesn't have to be a Saturday. I think those that work on the commission, maybe you guys, I think maybe we just need to get a survey amongst all of us commissioners, what days of the week or when we'd like to do it. Obviously for me, selfishly, I would say if it were in and around a time I need to be in town for a meeting, for the commission meeting, it would be good, which would mean maybe the Saturday after the commission meeting, if it needs to be on the Saturday, but I could do evenings and maybe we just get a survey of when anybody feels like they have the most free time. And then the subject matter is, our outreach to why we promote and, instill to the community why it's important to get historic preservation designations and how to get people interested to designate a district that isn't already designated. And do we go door to door? Do we put little flyers on their door? Do we go to social media? Where do we go? And I think we need to focus it obviously to property owners. So the demographic is, it's got to be not necessarily a rental market, but a homeowner market. And if this chart shows that a great deal of those people are on Facebook, it looks like Scottsdale website is a good key point. Social media is another, and the newsletter. I mean, I think we could start discussing those things if we could figure out a retreat date.
Doris, doesn't Google have a form that you could send out that would ask everybody what their availability was?
Vice Chair and Commissioner Edmonds. So I can send out an email. What I need to be careful on is open meeting law and that's why I send individual emails for commissioners. So I can do that and see, I can have a couple times and see if those times work for the commission members for a retreat. And then also, I guess I can put some agenda items together and see if like a work program, do we want to talk about a work program for, or prioritize, what neighborhoods we want to try to go after.
Sure.
Just those kind of things. But I didn't know if you also want to direct Kelly Corset into doing some kind of outreach, or will that be discussed in your retreat?
Oh, yeah. We'd like you to do that too. Could you
Yeah, I
even
had
do
that
a
to the list.
calendar, Doris, that has asterisks instead of names? So if you saw, like, let's say we took a calendar and said, number 1 prior to number 2, number 3, and you could put an asterisk at the days. And so if you saw a cluster, everybody seems to be luring towards this particular Saturday, I can shift my other Saturday to this, then we can, I don't know if that would help at all to help migrate to a common date.
Vice Chair and Commissioner Hosmer. So I want to check our city facilities to see what would be available and times. But do we have consensus? So we're saying it could be a Saturday morning or it could be an evening meeting. Is there consensus that either of those works?
Or a breakfast club.
Yeah, right.
So, so I can look at our city facilities, try to figure out what might be available, and then give you some dates and then see what that works for. But I wanted to check. So we're talking about fall, but then if we get into November, is that going to be kind of disruptive? And should that, if we get into November, should we wait until January?
I mean, I think we get going on this as soon as possible. I mean, I would like to at least. And on that note, I mean, I'm not opposed to being like the meeting manager or the project manager on this. We could do more than one meeting. You know, I mean, if let's say Christy can only make a Thursday night and Peter can only make a Saturday, I will make myself available Thursday and Saturday to facilitate. We can have it at my house too. I mean, it doesn't matter that I mean, it's great that we have city facilities, but I mean, a couple of years ago, we did our big event at the Saguaro, and let's see, there were, I think, four commissioners were there. We just had to post that we're having, you know, a quorum. I mean, whatever that was, it was pretty easy, you know, to get around.
Well, and we could even consider doing a Zoom meeting if we had to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Vice Chair and Commission members, I will, I'm going to be on vacation for the next week. So after I get back, I will send an email out with some dates.
And Doris, Vice Chair Davis, if I may. I think it's always probably, I would say, always more helpful to react to something rather than kind of come up with things out of thin air. So I would be happy to sketch a simple communications plan just based on my review of things and perhaps the conversation that I may have had or could have with individual commissioners. And so that you have something to react to and maybe generate some more conversation and ideas. And I'd be happy to put that together along with my team so that you have something to base a conversation off of from the communications plan perspective.
I just want everybody to kind of keep in mind, I mean, you guys may be familiar with boards and commissions, but up until I started asking about it, I really thought like the mayor was the one that made all the decisions and that they were just like, oh, yes, do this. Don't do that. No, yes. Like, and when you tell younger people about the commission, about historic preservation, there's an aha moment that takes place. And so I think, you know, using our social media and our video and all that stuff to, you know, also promote the commission and what we do, and you get some younger people, you know, interested in preservation, conservation, and some of these, you know, topics that are on everybody's mind now that we're in a global crisis with our climate. So, you know, preservation and conservation, I mean, these are things that they're going to be around for a while, and we need to recruit lots of people to get involved, you know? Thanks.
I have a question for Kelly. What's the age of the TikTok users? Would that capture the 18 to 34 that's weaker?
Vice Chair Davis, members of the commission, I think that would be a more likely platform for the younger demographic, although my son's 12 and he's on there all the time. So you could pick up a lot of folks under age 18 there. I don't know that I'm ready to recommend that for this commission because it is a very specific medium when it comes to communication style. If we could think of some kind of fun historic preservation dance, maybe we could, I don't know. But we're definitely open to ideas and doing things a little bit differently. And as I mentioned, the library's on there. That's been kind of our trial But I know there's a couple of other groups that are interested in getting on there just for that same reason, to try to reach people in Scottsdale who we're just not reaching now.
So Kelly, that, there's this trend of building restaurants and bars and different events out of container ships, shipping containers. And so there's sort of an adaptive use, reuse. And people have always loved old buildings to turn, like if you go to not South Phoenix, but Central Phoenix, and you look at all the historic adaptive reuse projects, that lures people already to go to that venue, whether it's a clothing store or a bar or restaurant. It makes it exciting. So one of our outreaches should probably be some kind of development groups that could look at, because they can get federal funding too. There's tax incentives for them and federal funding for doing adaptive reuse. So if we can reach out to people like we're seeing here with the group that's doing the Kiva, et cetera, there's probably old, cool, funky buildings over there near the air park. There's some barrel vaulted warehouses over there that do tile and granite. If you got somebody to make sure that those buildings don't get destroyed because there's a unique character to it, like the church that we're in. Those people are people that are developers, and we need to have an outreach for them in addition to homeowners, condo developers, people that look at the last couple of projects that we've got designated, the sands and so forth, that we would never have thought those would gotten designated, but they're wonderful projects. So those are some people to put on the list. And then, of course, the young people, if they say, I love that place down in Phoenix that has all that character, we get them all hyped up about how exciting it is, promote it, spread the word. The developers hear that it works. They come in here and ask for HER funding, and we ask them how many sides of the building they're doing.
I've made a note. Thank you. Well, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Do we have any commissioner announcements? How about future agenda items?
Vice Chair Davis and Commissioners, I wanted to just see if you wanted the HRER funding discussion on the next agenda.
I don't think it would hurt. I think it's important that we don't get blindsided when our audience hears something and tells us that this has been the protocol previously or whatever. We want to understand it. So I think it's all the education is welcome.
Without any other comments, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Yeah.